for the Digital Inclusion in TA Discovery project. My name is Genta and I'm the delivery lead for digital innovation at LOTI. We won't have time to do the introductions, but please do introduce yourself in the chat. We'd really love to see who's joined us today. In terms of agenda, can we have next slide, Gillian, please? So in terms of agenda, and engagement actually during the session, we'll spend the first half certainly of the session sharing further kind of details about our user research interviews and kind of some initial insights following those interviews. There will be an opportunity for you to contribute towards the end of the session. So again, please do share your thoughts with us. We'd really welcome that. In the meantime, if there are questions that pop up, please do put them in the chat and we can address them at the end as well. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So next, so just a bit about the project, I guess, for those of you, particularly for those of you joining us for the first time. So as part of the Digital Inclusion Innovation Programme and in response to borough suggestions about tackling digital exclusion in temporary accommodation, we commissioned FutureGov to undertake deep user research just to help us understand the circumstances and digital inclusion needs of those who live in TA. And that's more so, it can help us think about designing targeted interventions to address those needs. And maybe I think I'll hand over to Sophie and the rest of the team to introduce themselves and then hand over to FutureGov colleagues to talk about more of those findings and insights.
Great, thanks, Genta. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Nelson, and I'm Digital Inclusion Projects Manager at LOTI. And I will pass you over to Rachel to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kelly. I'm the Principal Consultant at FutureGov, working on this project. So it means that I keep oversight of it, working with our researchers, Gillian and Hannah. And on that note, I'll hand over to Gillian.
Hello, yes, I'm Gillian. I am one of the design researchers leading the project along with Hannah as well, who is not in today, but we've been going out on the ground doing research, talking to many people, and I'll also primarily be sharing some of our initial insights and findings that we've been collating over the last few weeks, and then also working alongside of us is Courtney, who is our key delivery manager. She keeps things going, makes sure that the project is running smoothly. She's also not here today. And then we've also been working with Tristan from Digital Poverty Alliance, who may be here today, may not be. Yes. So he's been kind of helping us from an external lens perspective as well. So yeah, those are our key team members, and I'll hand back over to Rachel to just walk you through what we've been up to for the past few weeks.
Fab. All right, it's a very short one. I won't bore you essentially, but just to show how we've reached these insights, and the aim is really to do some ethnographic research, spend time with people, so that we move from just reporting to actually seeing how people are living their lives and getting a much richer picture. And we will get onto that in a moment because there's some quite interesting stuff. So what we've done, we have interviewed 14 council staff, and that may be commissioners in some councils, or it may be temporary accommodation managers. Each borough has sort of taken it differently depending on the circumstances of how things are managed. We've done 5 visits to hostels, and we've done it across London, sort of inner and outer, and also a range of commissioned models, but also directly provided. We've talked to 7 hostel staff and 15 residents living in temporary accommodation hostels. We've had so far 25 people attend our first show and tell, which was a couple of weeks ago, and we are and we've had this week a couple of interviews with some key workers, so support workers. So tried to, having taken a step back, looking at where we think there might be gaps, and so we've added that and one survey, and in total that adds up to over 29 hours spent gathering insights on that, and we are still going. We had one this morning. And you'll see that we have 2 more key worker interviews to go. At the bottom of this, you'll see the list of councils that we have been working on. So I won't read them out to you, but you can see there how we've tried to get a spread of different models and boroughs. That's it, I think, from me. Over to you.
Great. So passing back over to insights. So essentially, I'm kind of going to go through some of the initial observations and findings that we've been recognizing and kind of making patterns, or the patterns that we've recognized across some of our hostel visits and our interviews with commissioners and council staff as well over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So this is what we've been kind of deep in headspace doing, specifically this last week, is just sitting with the data we have, trying to make sense of it all, and seeing where we're understanding the biggest opportunities, areas to be. And I'm just going to take you through some of the findings that that we've been recognizing throughout that analysis and that synthesis work. The first one we have, so I'm going to start with some of the just wider hostel insights that we've been finding. And one of the first things that we recognize just from talking to various councils and various council staff and commissioners was that hostel type, provision, staff, and digital setup really differs across councils. Councils even just have different understandings of what a hostel may mean. So our broad definition that we've recognized and that we've been running with is essentially a building with multiple occupancy units and some shared facility. However, each council has different criteria in terms of who gets allocated into hostel accommodation, what support level looks like, and even what facilities or spaces are shared. So in some hostels, that may mean that only bathrooms are shared. In some hostels, it may mean that they just have a shared building manager, really. In some, it may mean that they actually have more of a communal space, communal kitchens, communal just social areas as well. So it really differs. It really varies depending on councils, and with that, who is allocated into hostels also varies. So for example, one of the surprising things we found is when we went into this, we thought we would find many more single people in hostels and not as many families. And what we've actually realized is that many councils primarily allocate families to their hostels. One of the other things that we've recognized as well is that councils with commissioned hostels tend to have access to higher levels of hand-on support for residents. So for example, when we went to Camden and Kensington and Chelsea, this meant, and this looked like, having on-site key workers who had daily interaction with residents and kind of co-created support plans with residents to understand what their key goals are, what that kind of move to independent living might look like, and alongside that included regular staff check-ins and regular assessments of that support plan to see if it was working for that resident. On the flip side, hostels that were council-led tended to be much more independent and self-service style. So this looked like hostels with much more self-contained units, less public communal space, so less of that socializing space, off-site key workers that were only assigned to residents when the need was kind of made known. So when those residents were nominated to be working with a key worker. On-site staff tended to be more responsible for building management rather than providing that that kind of resident support to get into independent living, and they really had a lot less time available to really help residents do that, even though they did help when they could, but because it wasn't a part of their job role or their responsibility, they didn't have that time allocated to really help out as much. So what does this mean? I think what we want to think about with this is how might we learn from those relative digital successes from commission-led boroughs, and is there a possibility that we can trial them within council-run hostels? And furthermore, how might we, when we're thinking about what opportunity areas we have or what potential solutions we might develop, how might we work together on what those common challenges are across commissioned hostels and non-commissioned hostels, to understand what those common challenges are and find solutions that could be fit for purpose across those councils as well. So those are some of the things we're thinking about in that space. The next point is, oh, did I skip something? I did. I skipped many things. How weird. How did that happen? Give me 2 seconds. Okay, that's where we were. That's where we want to be. Cool. So the next thing that we've recognized is that on paper or from higher level council perspectives, hostels may have great digital support, but this doesn't always translate to lived experiences. So what we mean by this is what we recognized, at least, or observed, is that some councils have provided Wi-Fi within hostels. They've worked really hard to do that, and they've even worked on things like improving Wi-Fi reception. However, this didn't always kind of translate into what we experienced when we were in hostels. So an example of this is one council we visited had worked to provide free Wi-Fi in all locations and boosters in all of the hallways, so that Wi-Fi could have a strong signal in people's rooms. However, when we actually went into the hostel, it was like clear from the moment we walked in that there were not enough boosters in the hallways, which meant that Wi-Fi didn't have a strong signal in every room and the end. And this became really pertinent and really acute during the pandemic, and that's what we realized as well, is that a lot of issues with digital inclusion have become much more acute during the pandemic. And in this case, because it was a primarily family-oriented hostel, there were, school-aged kids. There could be 3 to 4 in each family room. And when they were all needing to do schooling and homework online during the pandemic, that Wi-Fi issue became very, very prominent. So weak signals in rooms meant that a lot of children were doing homework in their public spaces, but that public space in this hostel was essentially a communal kitchen, the front lobby, or the public library if they needed to on the way home, if they needed to do that quiet space. So this picture I have here is actually one of the communal kitchens that the children were doing homework in. So they would all kind of gather in this little group area and do homework together. But what the issue was there is that you have all of these kids, all of school age, kind of doing their homework in one space, distracting each other, and even though their parents wanted to kind of keep them in a room to have that quiet time for them, so for them to do their homework, because the signal was so weak, they just couldn't do that. So the point there, I think, is even though when there are problems, they're not always relayed, and they're not always as straightforward avenues to get solutions. So how can we measure whether the opportunities when we're putting forward opportunities and we're putting forward solutions, how can we really think about how we can measure whether what we provide is going to be effective and if it's working or not? How do we make sure that those feedback loops are really strong? So that's something we really want to think about. And now to kind of get into what that digital exclusion space really looks like. So what we recognized is that for many people, temporary accommodation can mean that it's not really that temporary. It can mean months of living in temporary accommodation, and it can even mean years of living in temporary accommodation. And so the important point there is that residents really need digital setup that helps them achieve long-term goals. And this might look different depending on what the access is within their council. So digital access is now a key part of living in society. And a sustainable model of assisting people into independent living means providing access to digital provisions. And with our research, we've started to kind of put together and recognize that there's a little bit of a hierarchy of residents' digital needs. So the baseline here is providing Wi-Fi and providing good phone reception. So what we recognized, there were some hostels that did provide Wi-Fi and there were some that didn't. And in the ones that didn't provide Wi-Fi, that was like the key thing that was on people's minds, was just like, I need Wi-Fi to function in society. So we had one woman, and another problem is if they don't have Wi-Fi, a lot of the buildings that they're housed in have very thick walls. They're very old, so they also don't have good phone reception either if they do have access to a phone. And because they're old buildings, they're not wired for Wi-Fi, and so they can't. And the pain of being in temporary accommodation is they don't necessarily always have the capability of being able to go out and get Wi-Fi for themselves as well. So, for example, we had one hostel resident who she had a job, but in order to work, she needed to fill out an online assessment weekly before she went into work. And her biggest pain was, how am I meant to hold down my job when I need access to Wi-Fi to do my job? I can't get my own Wi-Fi because of the hostel not being set up for it. And I can't even get good data service because the walls are so thick. I could go to the library, I could go to my friend's house, I suppose, but I also have a baby. So it's really hard for me to regularly go to the library or a friend's just to do this online assessment. So that's kind of the baseline. Above that, you have access. So once people are provided with Wi-Fi and good phone reception, access to devices and printers becomes like the key thing. And then above that, you have safe and quiet communal spaces and privacy. So that kind of was a good example of that, was kids doing homework in these busy public spaces and having problems going through with that. Or, for example, having to bid for housing, having to do very personal things. You want to make sure that someone has that safe, quiet space to do that in. And then above that, you have providing assistance when needed. And I'll kind of pick into some of those as we go through these insights. So what does that mean, essentially? I think what we're trying to get at here is, how can we help provide for residents longer term needs and goals, as well as short term and immediate needs? There's a spectrum of things that people need to meet longer term goals. And we're hoping that this kind of framework we've identified here that we're building can help hostels and councils navigate how to support residents digitally in different ways. So along with that spectrum of various needs, there's also a spectrum of what people feel digitally confident doing, and it depends on what's at stake with the task at hand. So residents may be digitally able to do some things. They may have some level of digital confidence, but one thing that we've noticed actually is really affects them is they also may have lower trust that digital systems will help them achieve what they need. So essentially the more higher stakes the task, the more likely residents are to want support of a key worker, a hostel manager, or someone official to increase their perceived chances of success. So what this might look like, for example, is we talked to one hostel resident who was relatively quite digitally confident or capable when it came to, he had a smartphone, he was able to answer his personal emails, and he liked to, play games on his laptop. But there are tasks such as in order to move on, he needed to get ID, and he needed to apply for, and he was doing this through applying for a passport. And he did not feel confident doing that on his own. It was a very high stakes task, having to fill out forms, understand the jargon, understand what that process was. He did not trust the system enough to be able to not have assistance or to do this independently. And that's why that he needed assistance from a key worker to do that task. And that came up again and again, is people were able to go on to social media or Twitter or to chat with their friends digitally. But when it came to filling out forms, trying to apply for housing, for example, understanding what those processes were, that's where that kind of lack of confidence really lay. So what does that mean? One of the things that we're thinking about here, how might we help provide different levels of support for different needs along the spectrum? And are there any examples that we can think of overcoming this from elsewhere? Our next finding is that this is a long one, and I'm kind of going to go through it piece by piece, but the overall view is that, to build onto my last point, is that residents' confidence and understanding of services can be built through showing them what's available and how to use them. So I want to start explaining this by saying that being put into temporary accommodation can often be a very traumatic and shocking experience. Completing tasks that are new and things that may have been done before can be overwhelming for people in a completely unfamiliar and stressful context. So what I mean by that is that even if you've tried to look for a house before when you were not in temporary accommodation, because you're already you've been put into this completely new context, it's quite shocking. We've been told that you can't actually come to housing for help until the day you're evicted. So people are in a very shocking situation. They've just been evicted. It's a really horrible experience, and you feel very unstable. So even when it comes to doing tasks you might have done before, oh, interesting, Ryan. All right, we can talk about this later. I've heard this from a hostel manager, so it would be interesting to talk about that. But it's a very destabilizing situation. It's and even things that you have, even things that you've done before in a completely new context can be completely unfamiliar and hard to do. So many of the services that residents need to use to move forward are now online, and it's much harder to get that face-to-face support they need unless they're classified as higher need. So the combination of a high stress situation, low confidence, new contexts, and digital services without support can mean people feel overwhelmed and stuck. to move or to kind of further go on from that, when trying to get help or assistance with their situation, people living in temporary accommodation can get frustrated with having to explain their situation repeatedly. It can be a difficult subject to discuss, and the potential there's a big potential there for people to have to relive these traumatic experiences over and over again. So we heard this constantly, that people want someone that they can talk to who understands their situation and wants to help them. However, a combination of kind of a lack of face-to-face support and the requirement to submit their information through digital systems can make people feel less understood and more alone. So we heard hostel residents say things like, "I just want someone to speak to," so they know there's something behind your story and you're not just a number. Or another woman said that it feels very robotic. In my last console, I got told a lot of "we're not dealing with this issue," or to just email when I was phoning. You know, I could be stuck in a phone queue for 2 hours, and it's really frustrating to wait 2 hours to talk to someone. I'm not just calling the council to have a chat. I need to do something, and this is like a very, very hard queue to be stuck in. Or, you know, the same resident said that she needed to submit things online in a form, and every time she would call up, they would ask her if she'd submitted this thing, and she said that she'd ended up having to submit it about 5 or 6 times. And it was just very jarring to think that I've put this information, this personal information, into a system, and I don't know where the heck it's gone. The people I'm talking to don't know where it is, and that can be just really uncomfortable. So residents' confidence and understanding of this and of services, as I've said, can really be built through showing them what's available. So what we've seen is that there's actually evidence that showing residents what services are available to them by bringing the services to them can help uptake and help get people really comfortable with dealing with services, actually seeing what services can be used for. And so sometimes people really need that face-to-face intervention to take the first step. So what we heard from we heard evidence essentially that that it was very useful at times for services to be brought to people. So there was an example of in one council we went to, there were all of these services available at the children's center for parents and for families. However, when they were just signposting that parents could go to the center to use these services, they weren't getting a lot of uptake. But when they started bringing people from the children's center into the hostel themselves, they started to see a much bigger uptake in usage of the services. So they were building those relationships with families. They were showing them, you know, we do have free childcare, we do have parenting classes, and the hostel manager we spoke to kind of had this prediction or had this assumption that a lot of the people who the services were aimed at, they didn't feel comfortable, and she'd heard this, they didn't feel comfortable going out, they didn't feel to the children's center and saying that, you know, this is my situation, I'm living in a hostel. Like, that can be a very taboo thing to say. It's not something that someone wants to share all the time. So actually bringing that service to them, showing them what's available, building that relationship, made them comfortable using the services, and made them then comfortable kind of going out to that space, because they were able to, they knew the people there, they knew what was available to them, and they could feel more comfortable going into that space when there was a friendly face there, essentially. Another example of this is when we went into Redbridge. They have these information portals. These were initially housed in the housing center, And when that closed, the manager decided that they would take the portals that were in the housing center and bring them directly to the hostel. And what they've seen is that it had a huge uptake. Like, people queue up at this thing at like midnight to start bidding for houses. Like, so when the service was actually brought in, the uptake of it became really, really pertinent as well. So essentially, in situations where hostel and external services help residents show them options that are available, residents' horizons and motivations can broaden massively. We had examples of people who'd started doing online courses, and some of them had been shown these online courses by staff. Some of them had gone to the library and started speaking to people at the library who had shown them courses, and they were able to identify things that they wanted to start taking forward as a career. And so the more and more that's shown to them, and the more they're able to kind of see where they'd like to go from there. So what there is, how might we provide gateways to digital services to help people use them themselves? How might we help introduce residents to new services? And how might we help people understand what digital services are available to them as well? And that is our kind of initial overview of some of the insights that we've been forming and gathering throughout our research. And I see that the chat has been great, so I can't wait to read through these. But also we have a, can I copy it? Rachel, could you copy that and put it in the chat potentially, if you can get a hold of it? Because I can't do it because I'm on the
if you send me the link of these work, oh, there you go.
I've just popped it in, yeah.
Okay, thank you to Sophie. So if we've just popped this Easy Retro chat in the link, if you could go in there, if you attended our show and tell last time, very much the same thing. We have some questions that we have put up there, and we would love for you to go through, take some time. We'll take about 5 minutes right now to let you put some comments in there. And yeah, please leave your thoughts, and yeah, leave your comments, leave your thoughts, anything that you would find useful or helpful to share with us. I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm going to switch over to that Easy Retro and share that instead, if I can get it up.
The link isn't working for me. Are other people having problems?
I've seen it. It's working for me. Okay. If it isn't working, just give a holler or leave your chat in the comment as well. Oh no, what have I done? There we go. All right, if you guys want to take, just the next 5 minutes to put some comments in, that would be great. Oh my gosh. There we go. All right, I have, that's been about 5 minutes. I know there's a few things coming in, so please keep using this, keep leaving your comments. I'm wondering if anyone, I mean, Genta or Sophie, do you want to take over the discussion? Do you want to, how would you like to do that?
I think it might be good to hear from some of the people who've made the comments, actually, because some of them are really, really interesting around both what kind of councils are doing at the moment, but also things that they've found that really resonate with them, and equally around opportunities to address some of these challenges. So really good to hear from colleagues on the call, really.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to kind of share any of the things that they've been putting down in the comments, discussions?
One specific question I had, actually, I mean, there's lots of, all the points are really good ones and we should really dive deeper into them. But one that I certainly have less experience about and keen to hear more about is the financing options for councils. There's a comment in the green, the second, in the third column, that second comment around financing options for councils and learning from service providers and all the commission service models.
Mm-hmm.
Just keen to hear, to kind of understand more about that, what that model looks like from your experience.
I can go here if you want. I asked that question. Yeah, all it is I think you've picked up from a lot of, within our borough particularly, that a lot of our supported accommodation, what you've termed commission service mainly throughout the presentation, has quite good Wi-Fi connectivity. But what I'm primarily interested in is how we replicate that in more quote unquote traditional temporary accommodation hostels, which is, at least in our borough, mainly housing single people, and it's around, how do we actually finance that in a context where people's income might be quite constrained, and they might be using housing benefit to pay their rent and not have huge amounts for service charges. And is there any way to set it up so that people can discretionarily take out the broadband if they want, or they can find another solution, which is maybe more using mobile data? Because as I think within some of the supported accommodation, it's sort of not really optional. It's sort of built into your service charge, because everyone has sort of access to it. So it's, sort of looking, that would be very helpful to understand what are the different options that councils or housing associations can look at around financing for their residents in this type of accommodation.
Great, no, thank you for that.
Yeah, just the point that Jennifer's made as well is very important.
I think there's something around, it's Jennifer here. I think there's something around comparing commission supported accommodation to general needs temporary accommodation for statutory homeless households. And it's like comparing apples and pears. They're both entirely different funding models, and which is why there is different provision, apart from the fact that the people in supported accommodation have supported accommodation needs, whereas those in TA are primarily there due to just their homelessness situation. If they're singles, they will have some support needs, low-level support needs, for them to become priority need. But I'm not convinced that we know supported accommodation is in decline because financially those models of support don't stack up anymore with our current welfare and housing benefit regime. So I don't know, the financing things seems really, really, I'm not sure there's any lessons to be learnt there.
I think that's a really important point, that because it's financed in different ways, that therefore the solutions will be different. And I think we've got to therefore make sure that when we get to the stage of thinking about solutions, we need to be taking account of that. I think it was helpful to see a range of people who are supported accommodations and those that aren't. There are some universal truths across the board, and there are some, and then there are some differences, and we will tease that out when it comes to the solutions, because I think appreciating that how you approach those will be different.
In Hackney, we've had a model of acquisition of temporary accommodation across the borough for about 3 years now, and we do 10-year lease deals with private developers on properties. Couple of years ago, we opened 148 unit self-contained hostel, and they all come, our service provision, our spec contains free Wi-Fi, laundry facilities and communal space for children, as well as gardens. We've just opened one in July. It was a 29-bed self-contained hostel. We opened a 92-bed earlier on this year in the spring. And we've got another 5 to come in the next 2 years. And it's about making clear what your specification is, and Wi-Fi, when you're doing work with developers, is considered standard. We wouldn't look at somebody who wouldn't consider that as part of their standard spec now. And the majority of those deals come in with us making a surplus that we can then plough back into the next deal, and our old owned hostels, which are actually far more difficult to maintain and bring up to spec. I don't know if that helps who was asking.
I think that's really helpful. I think that's both an example of best practice, but also a sort of reflection of sort of new units coming online. That sort of stuff is more, as you said, it's easier to do, but then with the existing stock, that becomes slightly more complicated. I think that's really, really, really helpful. I'm reading the comments because I think there's some really helpful stuff in there. I'm particularly actually because we've intentionally not gone to the solutions yet, because we wanted to do the reflections first, but as we're beginning to inch towards that, it's just quite helpful to see what you will all find, what you will want to see, and how we shape that as well. And I'm pleased to see that actually it's not a million miles away from some initial conversations we've had about this as well. Any other thoughts or comments or reflections that people want to verbalise? Brilliant. I find these sessions really, really helpful. In particular, the feedback on the Easy Retro. Actually, I'm a big fan of doing it in this way. Gillian and Genta, is there anything, or Sophie, is there anything that you want to add before we close?
I think, Sophie, you have your next steps.
Yeah, I can quickly run through the next steps. I think we've got a slide for that as well.
My computer's frozen for a little bit.
If not, I can just talk.
Oh, well, there we go.
Well, there we go. Brilliant. Thank you. So yes, I'm just going to run through our sort of final steps, actually, as we're about to go into the last 2 weeks of this discovery. So as you've already seen, most of our interviews are finished. We've just got a couple more. All the hostel visits have finished. So now our colleagues in FutureGov are going to spend more time synthesising their findings. And then so next Wednesday, so that's the 24th of November at 1:30, they'll be holding a research playback session. So those insights will be shared in more detail and the opportunity areas will be presented. If you're on this call, you're more than welcome to attend. So if you'd like to, please let us know either in the chat now, or you can send us an email. I think there's contact details on the next slide, but happy if someone wants to put my email address in the chat, and then I can add you to the invite. So then after that session on the 24th, we're going to start reviewing and prioritising these areas of opportunity. Then the final report will be produced, and we'll be sharing that on the LOTI website so everyone can see it. And then to close the discovery, we will be holding a final show and tell, which again warmly invites everyone here to come along to. The date will be confirmed shortly, but it's likely to be the week commencing 6th of December. And so basically the best way to hear the latest updates about the discovery and find out when that final show and tell will be is to join our base camp space. So again, links on the slide, but I think someone can paste that into the chat, or I can in a minute. Brilliant, thanks, Genta. Yes, if you sign up to that, then you can hear more about this discovery and some other projects we're working on in digital inclusion as well. Yeah, and I think that's it from me in terms of what comes next. I don't know if anyone else had anything to add. Otherwise, just a real big thank you again to everyone that's taken the time to come today and share all your thoughts and suggestions and comments on the retro board and in the chat. It's really, really useful, as Rachel just said.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.